Hello and welcome to Breaking Bread with Rivaj Maharaj, where nothing is off the table. I thought today we could do a little podcast on Iran and how it has gotten to where it is today, given all the events that have been dominating the news recently regarding Iran and the uprising that's currently taking place that's crippled the entire country. So yeah, I thought if we were able to look back at history and trace the path that Iran charted on its way to the destination that it currently has arrived at. Um, let me start by saying I'm not in favor of the current Iranian regime. Neither am I against the current Iranian regime. My place here is just to look at the history of the country, or the fairly recent history of the country, and how it has gotten to the point it is at today. Because I think by looking at the history and the events of the past, we are better able to understand how we got here, where we actually are, and what are the possibilities of what could come next. I think history, it's important to look at history, to study history, because a lot of mistakes can be avoided if we study history. Then we have an idea of what not to do in order for us to charter a new course. Now, intrinsic to this uh, this this little history lesson that we're going to go on is, of course, Western influence within Iran and how they've managed to shape modern day Iran, and how we see similar situations playing out in Venezuela as well as in other areas of the world. Okay, so Iran was previously known as Persia, and the people of Iran practiced a religion called Zoroastrianism. They were fire worshipping people. However, around 632, you had the invasion of the Arabs and the Muslim conquests which began, and the Rashidun Caliphate managed to conquer the Sassanian Empire, and this led to the decline of Zoroastrianism and the rise of Islam in Persia. So we're more concerned with, I'd say, the last 70 to 100 years of the history of Iran, because that helps us understand how we got to where we are currently with the situation in Iran. So what had happened was that a gentleman by the name of Reza Khan, or Shah Reza, had come to power. He was a military officer, and he rose in the ranks and subsequently became the Shah of Iran. However, he was forced to abdicate in 1941 after the Anglo-Soviet invasion of Iran. His son, Reza Pahlavi, Shah Reza Pahlavi, was made Shah, and he assumed the throne. Now, Iran had vast oil reserves, and the British were keen to get involved in extracting that oil and doing business in Iran. So what you find is that the Anglo-Persian Oil Company was set up, and that company subsequently became known as what we know today, BP, or British Petroleum. So in Shah Reza had been the de facto ruler of Iran. However, in 1951, a gentleman by the name of Mohammad Mossadegh had come into power as the prime minister. Now, we'll do a little background on Mohammad Mossadegh because everything that you see happening in Iran today is intrinsic to what happened to this man. This man and his fate sealed the position Iran is in today. He was democratically elected, and his subsequent treatment by the Shah led to the positions we see Iran in today. Now, Mohammad Mossadegh was born on June 16, 1882 in Tehran, Iran, and he was the first Iranian to receive a PhD in law from a European university, namely the University of Neuchâtel in Switzerland. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. He was a member of the National Front Party. In 1951, he became the Prime Minister of Iran. And what he began to do was enact some sweeping changes which eventually landed him at odds with not only the British, but also the Shah of Iran himself. He began to introduce a range of social changes like social security, land reforms, higher taxes. But his most notable reform was that he nationalized Iranian oil. And that meant that the British, by way of the Anglo-Persian Oil Company, now known as BP, was ousted from Iran. Naturally, this did not sit well with them, and you had a conniving plan being devised between MI6 and the CIA. MI6 approached the CIA to help bring about a destabilization in Iran. And in order for that to happen, Mohammad Mossadegh had to be marginalized and removed from power. Now, bear in mind, he had brought in social reforms, he had been elected, and he was a favorite of the people. The first coup attempt failed, causing the Shah of Iran to flee to Baghdad and then on to Rome in 1953. However, in 1953, the second coup was launched by the CIA and MI6, and they were successful in having Mohammad Mossadegh put under house arrest. So he was removed from power. The Shah was flown back in. He resumed power, and Mohammad Mossadegh was put under house arrest. He was charged with treason, and he would later die of cancer while still under house arrest. The Shah, by the way, that operation to destabilize Iran and have Mohammad Mossadegh removed from power was known as Operation Ajax in 1953. The Shah subsequently came back to Iran, and he negotiated the Consortium Agreement of 1954, where with the British they divided ownership of Iranian oil production between Iran and the Western companies. The Shah of Iran had at his disposal a security apparatus known as the Savak, and they were trained by Western intelligence agencies. Their methods were extremely brutal. The Shah refused to tolerate any opposition, and he suppressed any dissent absolutely brutally. The Iranian people were basically forced into subjugation by the Savak. lots of torture, lots of extrajudicial killings, the usual things that go on. And you can see that when a state has to rely on those measures in order to keep itself afloat, the writings basically on the wall. Now, the we can draw a parallel, like, when you look at the end of the First World War, where at the Treaty of Versailles, the Western powers carved out Germany and imposed harsh restrictions and penalties on the Germans. The people eventually get to a point where it becomes intolerable, unbearable, and they explode. And the problem with that is that when they get to the point where they explode and they're so fed up and frustrated and demoralized, they tend to open the door to sinister forces from the opposite end of the political spectrum coming in. Hence, you had the rise of the Nazi Party. Now, you can see similar things happened in Iran, because in 1979, you had a build-up of this. It was like a pressure cooker where you have, the pressure building and building and building and no release valve, until eventually it exploded and you had the revolution of 1979. Now, it has to be mentioned that pre-1979 Iran was a very modern place. It was sometimes referred to as, the Paris of the Middle East. Very, very pro-Western, lots of Western ideas. The ladies wore miniskirts and bikinis and things like that. Things that today are unthinkable in Iran. However, 1979 happened, the Shah had to flee, and you had the Ayatollah Khomeini seizing power. And this is what I mean when I say the people get to a point where they're so fed up and so frustrated that they revolt. And you have a situation that is ripe to be hijacked by anyone other than the current ruling establishment, or anyone that the people see is going to follow the same narrative. So you had the Islamic Republic of Iran coming into being, and it became an Islamic theocracy. And you had the formation of course, now you have the Basij, the and the IRGC. You've got the Iranian police that control with a tight grip everything. Now, when I make mention of post World War One, pre World War II Germany, and the rise of the National Socialists, or rather the Nazi Party, and Hitler coming to power, and the subsequent events in Iran leading to the arrival of the Ayatollah Khomeini and the institution of a theocratic Islamic religion. So when you look at Europe today, you see a similar situation where any opposition to the current government's policies or way of doing things is quickly silenced. Where you have people being put into jail for Facebook comments and things like that, and it's these things are happening across Europe. The problem is, if you look at history, you see that these types of repressive measures only embolden and lead to an inevitability that results in something far worse than what you have at the moment. But you find that the people are so fed up and frustrated that they don't want to listen to reason anymore. And when that pressure cooker explodes, and when they when the people are absolutely fed up and they take to the streets, you know, you have violence that ensues, you have loss of life, but you also have parties sitting on the side with very sinister intentions, waiting for an opportunity like this to hijack it. And then comes in something far worse than what you currently have. So I'm saying, with everything that seems to be going on in Europe today, and the amount of suppression of people's free speech and things like that, it's something to bear in mind. The leaders should bear this in mind, because we're treading on very, very dangerous territory here. Now, pivoting back to Iran, you see that we've almost reached a point of having gone full circle, because you had this ancient civilization, you had the introduction of Islam, you had a version of it that was very liberal, that was practiced. However, you had any dissent being crushed by the ruling monarchy, which then caused a revolution, led to the uprising, which brought in a theocratic Islamic regime, which has now itself become the target of uh, riots and protests and discontent by its people. And a lot of that as well is fueled by sanctions being placed on them, because you know that sanctions don't necessarily affect the government, but they harm first and foremost the people. The aim behind sanctions is to break the will of the people, get them to revolt, and then you have regime change. However, it comes at a huge cost to the average man and woman of the country. Innocent women, men, children suffer to achieve an aim. And we see that Iran has now come full circle. Should the Reza Pahlavi's son become the new ruler in Iran, or be involved in the formation of a new government where he sits at the head, he has some stark choices to make. He has to make some very difficult decisions, and I wonder whether he would look back on the mistakes that his father made and the mistakes made by the current Iranian regime, in order to not traverse that same path and give the freedom his people, the people and the wonderful people of Iran so deserve. Because they're truly a beautiful nation. They are wonderful people who have just been to hell and back. I think they just fed up, and I just hope that they're not opening the door to what happened pre 1979, because another state security apparatus run along the similar lines like the Stasi and the Gestapo is certainly not going to help anybody. Thank you so much for taking your time to listen to this podcast, and please like, share, and subscribe and comment. It helps us with the algorithm, and it helps us grow the channel. Once again, thank you very much, and see you on the next episode.